Hi everybody. Today's lesson, in fact the next couple lessons, are all about biodiversity. Biodiversity is just the variety of life that lives in a certain area. It can be measured in terms of genes, species, or ecosystems. It's how we measure how healthy an ecosystem is. For example, if we look at a specific population, right? If we have genetic diversity within that population, it is a healthier, more stable population than a population where everybody's exactly the same. That way, not all individuals of this population are wiped out by one variable. An ecosystem is healthier if it's not just made up of a few species, but several different species. And finally, the planet is healthier the more ecosystems we have. So, throughout time, what we see is that our biodiversity is becoming more and more limited by things that humans do to the environment. Remember that ecology is the study of how everything is connected. It's the relationships that exist between organisms and their environment. So changing one small biotic or abiotic factor might not seem like it has big consequences, but in fact, because it's connected to everything else, a lot of times starts a chain reaction that we're unaware of, and unaware of the consequences of. So here we have an interesting picture and a question here that says, how can overfishing lead to an increase in baboon attacks on humans in Africa? Well, there's a story where a small African country needed to make more money, so they sold their fishing rights off their coast to the United States. And when the United States comes and fishes coastal waters off of some foreign country, they don't just send a few small boats with a few hooks and lines, but they send giant boats with giant nets. They don't just catch a few fish, they catch all of the fish. Well, the United States catching all the fish off this African country, there was no food for the African people to eat. So, instead of eating food from the sea, they started hunting small game, what they called bushmeat. So they would go and they would hunt rabbits and gazelles and things like that. But that's all food that lions normally ate. So with the humans hunting all the lion food, the lions just left the area. But with no more lions around, baboons had nothing to fear. So baboons normally come out in small groups at night and look for food. But that's only because they're hiding from lions. Once the lions left, the baboons had nothing to hide from, so they could march literally right down the street in these giant armies in the middle of the day, and had nothing to fear, and they would go and they would raid these towns and villages, and they would destroy crops, and they would break into homes and steal food. It got so bad that out of desperation, families were leaving their children home from school to guard their homes against baboons. Before you know it, in Africa, you have this war waging between school children and baboons. Right? All because of the U.S. overfishing. Right? Did the U.S. ever think that overfishing would cause a war between baboons and African children? No. Right? But it happened as a result of this big chain reaction. Right? So keep in mind that in an ecosystem, everything is connected. One of the ways that we've limited biodiversity is something called invasive species. Invasive species is a species that's living outside of their normal habitat. And it seems like if we take a species from one part of the world, for example, cane toads, this fat toad that we see right here is normally found in like Central and South America. And somebody introduced it and brought the cane toad over to Australia in hopes that they would eat a beetle that was damaging sugarcane crops. You would think that bringing a new species over to Australia would increase biodiversity, right? We have more diversity now because we have a brand new organism, but what we found is that introducing this cane toad killed off many of the natural organisms that are normally found in Australia, these native species. So what happened was that the cane toads, they didn't really do their job. We initially brought over 100 cane toads to Australia and hoped that they would eat these beetles that were destroying the sugar canes, but these beetles fed really high up in the sugar cane. These cane toads are too fat to jump that high to reach them. So they ate other things. Not only that, but these cane toads are super toxic. They have this milky white toxin that oozes out of these glands right behind their eyeballs. So anything that bites them quickly dies as a result of the toxin. So as these guys bred and hopped across Australia, they would end up like killing snakes and the crocodiles, destroying other insect populations that the Australians didn't want to see destroyed. Right? Eventually, the number of cane toads in Australia rose from 100 to almost 200 million. And we see that they start marching across Australia, moving further down south and further to the west. Eventually they'll take over all of Australia, hopefully not wiping out too many of the native Australian species as a result. But these invasive species are just one of the ways that humans have limited biodiversity of species around the planet. Alright guys, that's it for today's lesson.